Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I am back to ranking the works of a different mystery author, and today it is Anthony Berkeley Cox, who wrote under many different aliases, including Francis Iles, Anthony Berkeley, a Monmouth Platts, and even anonymously, as he had a few works published under a bunch of question marks and other strange aliases, such as the writer of the Layton court mystery. But this is part one of two, and since there are 18 novels to cover, I just split the difference 9 and 9 between the two videos. And I combined all the works into one list here rather than separate the Roger Sheringhams from the standalones. And I'll begin here with my usual warning of spoilers ahead, and I will try to keep them to a minimum. However, that will be a little difficult for this list, specifically because of Barclay's approach to writing. Barclay's mystery novels are largely experimental. He's always fiddling around with different ways to tell a story, different kinds of characters to be the murderers. He used a lot of twists, and because of that, much of my opinions stem from those things, so it is hard to avoid spoilers here. However, I did not reveal any actual murderers in this video, so there are other things spoiled and alluded to, but I will not give away the actual murderer in these books. And I'll continue on by saying these books have very poor depictions of women. And I will get into more specifics as I go through the novels, but women are not depicted well in these books at all. I mean, Berkeley had a notoriously poor and sordid relationship with women. He didn't like women very much, and it shows in some of these books. Before I begin, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with my new videos. I am ranking these books using the same criteria I always do. However, a few notes here. I did not include Professor on Pause or As for the Woman, as they are not mystery novels, and I do use a broad definition of a mystery novel for this channel. I will include thrillers, both adventure and psychological, and inverted mysteries, and other stories, as long as they're mystery adjacent. But Professor on Pause and As for the Woman are not even close. I mean, Professor on Pause is delightful, but not a mystery. And As for the Woman is apparently some kind of borderline romance erotica. I haven't read it, so I can't vouch personally for it, but it is not close to a mystery novel. I also didn't include the Detective Club collaborations Barkley participated in. He didn't write the entire novel, so I didn't include them, although I will get to those books in a video at some point down the road. All right, let's begin at the bottom at number 18. And I will say Anthony Berkeley is a fantastic mystery writer. I think he's probably second best to Christie in terms of quality. I'm not set in that opinion, however. I don't think there is a single dud in his bibliography except for this one at number 18, which is borderline unreadable. And it's actually the newest book to feature on this list, and that is Death in the House. And to be fair, this book's major problem, though certainly not its only, is the passage of time. This has not aged well at all. As an American living in the 21st century, I simply do not care about British colonizers of India, and I feel absolutely zero sympathy for them. This book involves the murders of members of parliament who die while introducing a bill to what is claimed to be stomping out terrorism in India. But given the language used in the book, which is mostly vague, it seems to be nothing more than just Britain strengthening its grip on India, who is moving toward independence. And the word terrorist is used very loosely here, and it's even used to describe Indians who simply want independence. And I just don't care about any of these things. The portrayal of Indians in this book is terrible. We're told this bill is so popular with Indians because they like to be oppressed. And this is the main focus of the book. It's very jingoistic and one in which the mystery takes a backseat. And then we get to the mystery itself, which isn't good either, although the premise is very intriguing. I mean, members of parliament are murdered during speeches when they present the bill. It seems like they were murdered with poisoned darts, but no one is really sure how. And unfortunately, we don't really get a satisfying explanation as to what is going on here. The solution is presented, but it isn't well explained. I'm not totally sure of the mechanics of it. And also, we have these really awful characters here. There are a lot of characters in this book, and almost every single one of them is a stodgy member of parliament referred to by their positions and occasionally their names, but then it isn't always made clear what names are in what position, and these characters are completely indistinguishable from one another. I couldn't tell you anything about the murderer of this book other than one or two really unsavory portions of his character. This book is, I believe, the shortest Barkley novel, but it took me the longest to read. I mean, there are books by him that are twice as long. It took me half the time to get through. This isn't the last mystery novel. This isn't the last novel Barkley wrote, as he was disappointed with the response to As for the Woman, which he published after this one and vowed never to write again. And it's a shame that this is his last mystery because it's terrible. I wish he went out on a better note. I have no positive things to say about Death in the House, so it comes in here at last place at number 18. At number 17, a much better book, and I think all of these books from now on are great. Some more than others, some more flawed than others, but all worth the read. But here I have the lowest ranked Roger Sheringham novel, The Wychford Poisoning Case. And I might as well talk about Roger Sheringham here, and he did not come close to making my top 10 detectives list because I just don't like him. He's obnoxious, and he's not even that good of a detective. He's actually wrong in multiple appearances, including the next book on this list. I don't like Roger Sheringham, but I love his books, if that makes sense. But back to this book, which is a goodish Barkley, but he takes a lot of shortcuts here. There are large chunks of this book where we just get a passage reading something to the extent of Roger decided to go see X person, and then instead of us seeing that conversation, the narration just immediately cuts ahead to Roger relaying that conversation to Alexander or his cousin Sheila. And we spend so much time away from the suspects of this book. I don't think we even meet half of them on the page. They seem so distant from whatever Roger is doing. And we're told like repeatedly like how fascinating these people are, but we don't see any of that. And there are a number of uncomfortable scenes here where Roger seduces this woman into giving evidence to him, and it's implied he sleeps with her to do so. And there are multiple, just like really vile scenes of both Roger and Alexander spanking his cousin Sheila because she spoke out of turn. I mean, Sheila, by the way, is an adult woman. And I would have bumped this book up like a couple of spots had it not been for those scenes, but this happens multiple times. And having said all of that, however, the mystery is pretty good here. And we have a wife about to go on trial for the arsenical poisoning of her husband, and Roger believes she is innocent, really for no reason, but he becomes obsessed with proving her innocence. And the plot is very clever, and there are a lot of entertaining twists and turns. The solution, like most Barclay solutions, is satisfying, but lacks that like something special. I mean, Barclay tends to just give us the answer with little fanfare, and that is what happens here. The solution involves arsenic eating, which is normally something I despise, but it's actually used cleverly here and correctly, I might add. It's not the typical solution you get when you hear about someone eating arsenic. And finally, this book is essentially a much worse version in every way imaginable compared to another book which has the same plot. And I will get to that one shortly in this video, but I have to put this one here at number 17. Number 16 is another very problematic Roger Sheringham novel, and that is Jumping Jenny, also called The Dead Mrs. Stratton, which is about all you need to know about this book. But jumping back to Jumping Jenny, and I love the premise of this book. Roger is at a house party where one of the guests, Ina Stratton, is murdered by hanging. And everybody hates Mrs. Stratton, so no one really cares, and all the guests work together to throw off the police and convince them that Mrs. Stratton committed suicide. But the guests are just really bad at this. I mean, Roger bungles pretty much everything by rearranging the crime scene for no reason, and this is all a lot of fun. It is hilarious to watch play out. The structure of this book is fantastic as well, where the narration tells us who killed Ina Stratton, making this an inverted mystery novel. However, this is not actually an inverted mystery novel. We don't find out until the very end of this novel that what we were told happened didn't actually happen. So you might be wondering, with all these big heaps of praise, why is Jumping Jenny this low? And the answer is because of Ina Stratton. I mean, Mrs. Stratton is treated like garbage in this book. She is not a jerk victim like we see in something like Murder on the Orient Express, where you kind of like agree, okay, yeah, maybe this person should have been murdered. That is not the case here, and this all stems from Barclay's opinion of women. It's not even alluded to in this novel, as pretty much outright stated that Ina Stratton's existence is slightly inconvenient to some men, so she has to die. And everybody, men and women included, are just all in agreement with this. If Mrs. Stratton had been depicted as a jerk victim, this book would be near the top. I mean, could be like top six, five, something like that. But when I read this novel, I'm just always left baffled because it's so difficult for me to wrap my head around this, and it casts a shadow over the whole book. Even in the book, the reasons for doing away with her are just vague. Like we're not even told like what she does that is so bad that everyone thinks she just should be murdered. It really comes across as Ina Stratton is just slightly annoying at a house party, so they all decide to kill her. She's also the mother of a small child, which is barely given anything more than a passing reference. It doesn't make sense. And I also find the actual murderer to be a really bizarre choice, as this person seemed to have even less motive to kill her than anyone else did. And this would have been a top tier book had Mrs. Stratton truly been an awful human being, and we still get all of that shenanigans of Roger and his friends trying to cover this up. But that's not the case here, so I have to put Jumping Jenny this low here at number 16. Number 15, another Roger Sheringham novel, The Silk Stockings Murders. And this one is a serial killer novel, and as I've said in the past videos, I'm just simply not a fan of serial killer novels when they don't do anything special, and this one doesn't. Like, The Silk Stocking Murders is not like the ABC Murders or The Cat of Many Tales that both have other things going on. This is a straight up serial killer novel. It's fine. It's not a bad book by any means, but it's just simply not my preference. The victims here are all young or youngish, attractive women who are found hanged with their own stockings. And because this is an Anthony Berkeley novel, there is the slight implication the victims brought it upon themselves because they're attractive and they date men. Though, to be fair, it's not as directly stated or as strong of a sentiment as one would expect. There's also a lot of, anti-Semitism thrown at Mr. Playdale here, who is bankrolling Roger's investigation. I just didn't find any of this part of this book intriguing. Like I said, it's not a bad book at all, but it's not also possible to solve this one using the clues in the book. Although I think a reader could easily guess the murderer just simply based on instinct and a lack of other options. We do have one of my pet peeves in this book where more than halfway through we get a bunch of new suspects suddenly show up on the scene with no development and no real story as to who they are. We're supposed to believe they could be viable suspects, but they are not, and they disappear into irrelevance just as quickly as they came into things. Again, the Silk Stocking Murders is just fine, so it comes in here at number 15. At number 14, I have another early Roger Sheringham novel, and there may be a pattern here, and that is Roger Sheringham and the Vane Mystery, also called Mystery at Lover's Cave. The beginning of this book is a lot of fun, where Roger drags his cousin Anthony to investigate the murder of Mrs. Vane, who fell off a cliff, or maybe she was pushed. Her death is treated as an accident, but it's very clearly murder. I love Roger's cousin Anthony, who replaces Alexander Grierson from the first two books as Roger's idiot friend slash sidekick. He was a lot of fun falling smitten with Mrs. Vane's cousin Margaret Cross, who really has no interest in him. I love Roger's teasing of Anthony. We're also introduced to Inspector Moresby for the first time, and I think this is his best novel. In future appearances, he comes across as slightly bland and a little incompetent, but here he takes his fair share of digs at Roger, which I appreciated. The mystery itself is largely uninteresting, and the novel stays afloat because of the earlier character moments. There's very little intrigue to me in this one. The murder was obvious from the start, and this is where I have the biggest question mark with this book. Roger and Anthony refuse to even consider Margaret a suspect. Anthony because he's smitten, and Roger because he's a sexist prig and doesn't believe a woman would murder someone by pushing them off a cliff. And this provides almost all of the obfuscation for this book. I'm not sure if we're supposed to read this as Roger is just an idiot, or if the reader is also supposed to fall for this trap. I lean toward Roger being an idiot because, well, I mean, first of all, he is. And secondly, because the murderer gets away with it in this book purely because Roger is an idiot. And this angers Moresby so much. And this isn't the only Sheringham novel where Roger doesn't get the bad guy because he's an idiot. But either way, I think this novel is a lot of fun, but the mystery needed a little more to it. So I have it here at number 14. Number 13, and this is a big one. I think people might expect to see this one higher on the list, but I have it here, and that is Before the Fact. And this book is infamous because Hitchcock adapted it into the movie Suspicion, which Anthony Berkeley hated. And if I'm being honest, I think the film is better than the book, although the book's ending is better than the film's. I think this book suffers, in my opinion, because I was very familiar with Suspicion before I ever read this novel, which is not the order I typically do things in. I prefer to read the book first, but Suspicion is a huge film, and I've seen it so many times before my initial read of Before the Fact. This book takes a long time to get going here, and much of the first half deals with Johnny Eisgarth doing something stupid, his wife Lena getting mad at him, forgiving him for no reason, Johnny promising not to do it again, and then he does it again, and the pattern repeats. The point is driven home hard that Johnny is not responsible as a human being, and Lena stays with him because she does love him, but mostly because everyone told her not to marry Johnny, and she wants to prove them wrong. I have to be honest, I don't necessarily feel there was a lot of suspicion going on in this early portion of the book where to me it's very clear what's happening. It's not until towards the back half of the book where the suspicion element really starts kicking in. But we go through this pattern so many times, it gets repetitive. But again, this is a fantastic novel. It is not a dud at all, and it doesn't slog at any point. I just think it needed some different actions at certain times. The ending is fantastic when things finally start to pick up, and Lena starts panicking that Johnny is going to murder her. And then she looks into what happened to her father's death and Johnny's friend Beaky's death, and she thinks Johnny may have killed them. I prefer the ending of the book to the film's ending. This is not a murder mystery novel, so we don't need a definite solution here, and we do not get a definite solution, and it works extremely well. This is the best ending to any Anthony Berkeley novel, but it's that little bit of repetition in the beginning that I could do without, and therefore places Before the Fact here at number 13. At number 12, I have the very first Roger Sheringham novel and Anthony Berkeley's first novel, The Layton Court Mystery. Like most first novels, I find the Layton Court Mystery good, but suffering from the typical first book jitters where the author hasn't quite gotten a grip on things. The plot here involves the murder of Victor Stanforth, the host of a weekend house party. This book focuses a lot more on the physical evidence and the traditional sleuthing than would be the norm in future Sheringham novels, but I do find Sheringham's investigations interesting and humorous here. He's always throwing out new ideas that prove incorrect almost immediately, only for him to come up with something else entirely. The plot moves along quickly, and there are plenty of suspects. However, Barkley took a lot of shortcuts here, which is also a problem I have with other novels as well. Events happen off page a lot, and we're just told about them rather than seeing them for ourselves. Roger seems to know things out of thin air, and we're never given like any explanation as to why. But I think the positives here far outweigh the negatives. This book is very humorous. I love when Roger and Alexander hunt down who they think is a dangerous criminal, only for it to turn out to be this enraged bull that chases him across the village. And the reveal is very shocking in this one and very satisfying. It is one of the more shocking reveals in a Sheringham novel, especially. The Layton Court mystery has a lot going for it, but it does have some flaws, so I place it here towards the middle of the list at number 12. For number 11, I have that book I referred to earlier when I was talking about the Wychford poisoning case, and that is Not to Be Taken, also called A Puzzle in Poison. And my biggest issue with this book is that I just can't get into it. Barclay's novels are always so gripping and absorbing on the premises alone, but this one just doesn't do it for me. It is a great book, however. There's nothing wrong with the plot. It doesn't drag, it's not boring, but this one just doesn't have a big concept to it like many other novels do. And it could be because this book is just simply a retread of the Wychford poisoning case. It does have like a different outcome, but I mean, because I've seen a lot of this stuff before from him, that could be the issue. Our victim here is John Waterhouse, who died of unknown causes that are originally attributed to a natural death, but is later proven to be murder by arsenic. And much of the intrigue revolves around the many possible ways the arsenic might have been taken. And like I said, the plot is fine. It's not spectacular. I have some issues with the way it played out. Certain events just seem to happen for convenience sake, and I didn't always feel like the actions of the characters were that believable. I didn't understand why John's wife Angela just allowed his brother Cyril to basically move in and take over his affairs for no reason. And this was clearly just a plot device to move things along, but we do have a very satisfying solution and murderer here. Typically, Barkley novels just end with the murder reveal and not much resolution afterward, but that is not the case here. But when compared to other books, especially the Wychford poisoning case, this book is superior in every way. I mean, the plot is stronger, the characters are fantastic, and I think it stands the test of time much better than most books I've already talked about. Except for Before the Fact, I don't think any of the previous books I've talked about already have nearly as good a characters as this book does, so that was enough for me to elevate Not to Be Taken to here at number 11. And we are cracking the top 10 here since I split the list in half. But at number 10, I have another Roger Sheringham novel, Murder in the Basement. And this is the last book for this video. And beginning with this one, I think we're getting to the exceptional novels. I think these books from this point forward are top notch, though some of them still have issues, like Murder in the Basement does. This one starts off fantastically with a newlywed couple discovering bones in the basement of their new home, and Inspector Moresby traces the body to a school where Roger filled in briefly. The structure of this book is interesting, where we have the present day investigation at the beginning and the end, and the narration flips in the middle to a manuscript Roger is writing, where his characters are basically the people he worked with, and we read the manuscript with the real names, not Roger's characters' names, and these events apparently did happen. And I found this unique and is not as hard to follow as it might seem. I think the murder plot here is very strong, and so are the characters. This is one of the more engaging Roger Sheringham novels, even more so than some of the ones I have ranked higher. This book does have some issues, none of which really detract from the enjoyment or quality of the read. We have another instance here of a female murder victim, and I will not name her because that is part of the mystery. This is an unknown corpse novel, but we have a female victim who is more or less treated as if she deserved to be murdered because she was about to ruin a man's life. It's not as bad as in Jumping Jenny, as at least in this book, the victim is made to be a blackmailer, so at least that's something, even if it did seem like thrown in there unconvincingly. Roger even lets the murderer go free here, which is not great. And there are some issues involving how the victim and or the murderer were lured to this house to begin with. The house is not helpful in terms of clues, and some of the mechanics involving it are sketchy, though I am convinced enough to believe what happened. I'm just not like fully convinced. But Murder in the Basement is not a perfect novel, but it is a wonderful book. So I have it here at number 10. And that is it for today. Next week, I finish off my ranking of every Anthony Berkeley Cox novel with the top 9 books. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date. I want to thank all of my listeners and subscribers as the channel is growing slowly but surely. Until next time, Mystery Files.